Well, there you go. Welcome to another edition of BeatlesARamaTV. I'm Pat Matthews, and we have a great guest today, friend of mine from New Orleans, another New Orleans guy. His name is Bruce Spizer, and he writes books all about the Beatles and their albums and their singles. And we're going to talk to Bruce right now.
Hey, Bruce. Hello, Pat. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are things down there in the Big Easy?
Well, the good news is I think that the city has taken a responsible attitude toward COVID-19. And after being an epicenter for a while, we no longer have that distinction. And I'm very happy about that.
So you're no longer in the top 10. Well, Louisiana might be, right?
Well, Louisiana's holding steady right now. So things are looking a lot better than they were when this thing first hit the South. I mean, we were the poster child for, bad behavior, and we've kind of improved it to a certain extent anyway.
Yeah. And of course, the French Quarter is taking a hit.
Oh, absolutely. It's really sad. And, we've lost some restaurants, I fear, permanently. And that's a shame because the food is so great down here.
Yeah. So you have a new book, right?
I do. I have a new book.
I can put the book up on the screen.
That would be nice. Hey, I recognize
it. How about that? And wait, you go that way, I go this way.
Yeah, so this is a book that is called The Beatles Finally Let It Be, and obviously it is about the Let It Be album now. And The title is a bit of a pun because when I was a kid, although those many 50-some-odd years ago, I would get Rolling Stone, and Rolling Stone would talk about this album called Get Back. And originally it was going to come out sometime in mid-'69, and then it kept getting pushed back and pushed back. And then we got to 1970, and it still was being pushed back. And then all of a sudden, it was now going to be called Let It Be because Get Back single came out so long ago. And It seemed like every issue Rolling Stone would say, well, it's been delayed another month. And so I remember reading in an issue, it said that Paul McCartney was coming out with a solo album, and they speculated that that album might not come out until after the Beatles released Let It Be, which would be coming out in April or May. And then it said Apple did not say April or May of what year, however. And I thought that was pretty funny. And when I was researching this book, I actually found that issue of Rolling Stone, and it did indeed say words to that effect. And you can read that in the book.
Yes, it is in the book. In fact, it's near the beginning of the book, because I was telling Bruce, I'm on page 50 now. Which I'm a very slow reader.
Well, it's a good thing because I've only written the first 100 pages, and I'll be mailing the rest of the book to you later on. No, that's not true.
That's not true. You can go to beatle.net and order the book. Yes. As a matter of fact, I have something to put on the screen here. Hold on a second.
Oh, good.
Wait, www.beatle.net. Maybe I should just take myself out of the.
I see it. Oh, there we go. Yes. And you even spelled Beatle correctly. That's pretty good. Yes, indeed.
I was always good at spelling and that kind of stuff, and see, now that says Bruce Spizer, author, and then it makes it look like maybe that's me, which is very confusing. But I'm just showing off all the bells and whistles that I have
see
with
that.
this production thing. You know what I mean? It's like being, at the console and being the director and producer and the on-air talent at the same time.
I mean, I would really be impressed if you had one that went across me in the other corner that said Pat Matthews, billionaire. There we go.
It would be a lie.
Well, I know, but it would still be impressive.
It would be impressive. So anyway, if you got questions for Bruce, hey, look at this. You visit StreamYard.com. Now, I've had people complain and say, nobody wants to do this, but it's no big deal. You go to StreamYard.com/Facebook. Then they'll say, ask permission to access your Facebook name and picture. People think that they have to upload their picture. No, it's whatever picture you have on, we just want to know who you are. Okay. So let me see. I'm going to check the comments right now. Well, Warren Brown is checking in.
Hello, Warren.
And he says, hi, Bruce, and thank you for the book. It's awesome. Best Beatles book I've ever read.
Oh, my.
There you go. Right. So you see, if Warren Brown can follow directions, so can you.
Absolutely. I was able to sign on myself.
Were you? I know. And that's why your name is on the screen. See?
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about when you were a kid and you were a Beatle fan. And, you just mentioned the space between the announcement of Get Back and the release of Let It Be, there were a lot of bootlegs that came out during that time that were called Get Back, weren't they?
Well, yeah. The chronology for me, as far as the whole thing goes, was I remember reading in TV Guide, I think it was around in April of 1969. It was a 2-page spread, and it showed the Beatles on top of this London roof playing music. And I thought that was pretty cool. And TV Guide said this was going to be for a TV special on the Beatles making their new album. And that was the first I learned of it. And shortly after that, I went to Studio A in New Orleans and was able to purchase the new Beatles single, which was Get Back, back with Don't Let Me Down. And then shortly after that, on the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour, I was able to see film of the Beatles performing Get Back. And I was looking at the picture in TV Guide, and it was like that picture came to life on the TV screen because it was the Beatles up on the rooftop doing Get Back.
Right.
So that's one of my memories. It was a great single. Absolutely loved it. And then as the summer wore on, Rolling Stone would talk about this new Beatles album. They even described all the songs on it, but the only ones you heard were Get Back and Don't Let Me Down. And so I would keep reading about it in Rolling Stone, and then all of a sudden, I walk into Studio A and there's this new Beatles album, but it's not the Get Back album, it's Abbey Road. And that was very confusing. But then Rolling Stone explained it all, that actually, they were going to put this one out because it was going to match a movie called Get Back. It was no longer going to be a TV special, but be a movie. And it would be called
even more complicated, right?
Right. And then it would be out by November, and then it would be out, in time for Christmas. And then it would be out in January. But the next Beatles single would be called Let It Be. So maybe the movie would also be called Let It Be. But what I remember, we had all this stuff going on. But what I remember was Christmas Eve, 1969. And I'm listening to the radio in New Orleans. There was a station that was Spanish music during the day, and they went hippie at night, as my Spanish teacher would say. And the guy said, we're going to be playing some tracks from the new Beatles Get Back album. And I had gotten, for Christmas, and I got it early, a cassette radio player combination from the place called the Radio Center. And I got a little cassette, a little realistic cassette, popped it in that baby, and I started taping. So I actually got to tape the Get Back album. And he played the entire Get Back album. And then afterwards, he played Barry McGuire's Eve of Destruction. I don't know why, but it zapped me back into reality. And I kept that cassette, and I played it very frequently, including when I was at Newman High School, and we took a bus trip up to Washington, D.C., and I sat around with my friends that were Beatle fans, and we listened to that. And it was like forbidden fruit, and I was the only one who had it. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I remember, those times as well. And, of course, I'm older than you, Bruce, so,
Yeah, but why is your hair jet black and mine is gray? Actually, it's white. I skipped gray.
Well, our good friend Maury, he watched the last video, the last interview I did with the Mona Lisa twins. Do you were aware of them?
Yes.
Yo, you should be. Yeah,
I should be.
And they were the house band every Saturday night at the Cavern for like 2 years recently. Anyway, Maury commented, he says, "Yay, you look pretty good, Pat." He says, "Why are you coloring your hair?" And I said, I'm not. I said, "Now you sound like my brother, because he's been gray for the last, 20 years. And he's always accused me of coloring my hair. It's just gel. I have gray hair on this side, but you can't see it when you put the gel in it. See?" So I was ready for my close-up today, Mr. Spizer.
There you go. So we're all set. So anyway, though, what I loved about the bootleg, these songs had this raw quality to them. The sound quality was okay, but not great, obviously.
Right. It sounded like one of those little things, little suction cups on the window. You know what I mean?
And my favorite track on it was probably Let It Be, followed closely by Long and Winding Road. And then the Let It Be single came out, and I loved it. It sounded great. I noticed, obviously, that they had added horns. It was also a totally different take. The one on the bootleg started with Paul going, "I 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, boom, boom." And it was great. Loved the single. And then when Long and Winding Road came out, I remember hearing it on the radio and thinking my radio was broken, because I could have sworn I heard these syrupy strings and a choir and a harp, and I was just horrified.
Right.
And when I went
and
to
so was
Studio
Phil Spector. I mean, so was Paul McCartney.
Yeah, and I went to Studio A, and and Bill played the single for me, and I was ready to puke. It was disgusting to me because it wasn't this beautiful ballad. And I looked at the label, and it said reproduced for disc by Phil Spector. And I'm like, what the hell is Phil Spector doing producing the Beatles? Yeah. And I was sickened by it. And I asked him, I said, look, I'm not going to buy the single because it's on the album, which is coming out next week. But could I hear the other side? And it was a song called For You Blue by George. And I liked that a lot. Mm-hmm. And there was no Spector on that. He just mixed it. So when I got the album, I put it on the turntable and I get this, I dig a pygmy, thing. And all of a sudden, Two of Us sounds brilliant. On the bootleg, Two of Us was a slow plodding version. And here it's upbeat. The guitars are clean. The vocals are clean. And I thought, well, maybe Spector did a great job afterwards. And then some of the other tracks were actually from the Rooftop, like, Dig a Pony or I've Got a Feeling. They sounded great. I had already heard Across the Universe on a charity album, which someone I knew had. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like what he did with Across the Universe at all. And, then I heard I Me Mine for the first time because it wasn't on the bootleg. And I liked the song, but I wondered, it seemed to have unnecessary strings on it, but still it was a great rocker, and I was okay with that. Mm-hmm. And then I heard his version of Let It Be. And it started the same, and then all of a sudden you get this echo on Ringo's hi-hat. And then all of a sudden for the rest of the song, you have the horns that are just competing with Paul's voice, particularly at the end. They're just blaring in this raunchy guitar solo by George, so different than what I was used to hearing. And I absolutely hated Let It Be on that album. Mm-hmm. I know some people love it because they love George's guitar solo.
And I think also Billy Preston's keyboards were different too, right?
A little bit, but it's the same take. It's just a different mix. And I didn't learn that till years later. Every review I read talked about it as if it were a totally different take. Spector made it sound like a totally different take, but it wasn't. And Long and Winding Road was as bad on the album as it was on the 45.
Yeah, it sounded like it was through a Leslie.
Well, it was just the instruments were all there. He brought the brass up to the front. He brought the horns up to, the horns and the strings up to the front. Whereas George Martin on the single had them nice and laid back.
It's kind of like the Beatles' wall of sound all of a sudden.
Yeah. And look, and here's the thing. What did Spector do wrong? All these embellishments. What did he do right? He picked better versions. The Glenn Johns version of the album, the Get Back album that came out, for instance, one of my favorite songs on the album is I've Got a Feeling. Spector took it from the Rooftop concert. Brilliant performance. The problem with the one Glenn Johns picked, it was a fun, rough performance. And toward the end of the song, John quits playing because his guitar's going too loud, and he stops playing. And you miss the best part of the song when John and Paul's voices are going back and forth with each other. And so, to me, there's never been a perfect version of that album. And that's kind of sad. And I talk about in the book all the different versions of it. You have Let It Be Naked, which came out maybe 10 years ago.
Right.
And on that
the first time I heard that was at your house.
Yeah. And the sound's pristine. But the problem is it doesn't have the fun little bits between the songs, because what they were trying to do was say, what if the Beatles had recorded the album and tried to make it like another Abbey Road type thing? Mm-hmm. And so while it sounds brilliant, it has no soul. Mm-hmm. And so, and then on the anthology, you've got about a dozen tracks from the Get Back sessions. So there's so many different versions of this album, and you can do it yourself and put together your favorite if you want. And I've done that before. And
here's a commercial. You can hear all of these on BeatlesARamaTV.com.
Yes, indeed.
So you started off back in, how many years ago was it, Bruce, when you came out with the Beatles on VJ?
Beatles on VJ came out in 1998. So I guess over 22 years ago.
That was the first one, right?
That was the first one. And the idea was that I was going to do one book on the Beatles with their records on VJ. It would be a footnote in Beatles history. Maybe collectors would enjoy it. Maybe historians would enjoy it. And that would be it. Mm-hmm. And the book came out and got critical raves. And people are like, well, when are you going to put a book out on the Capitol records? Okay, well, I'll start a book on the Capitol records. And when I got to about page 450 in that book, I realized it was going to have to be 2 books. So one covered the singles, one covered the albums. But even before that book was published, people were saying, what I really like are the Beatles records on Apple. So you need to do a book on the Beatles records on Apple. So, okay. So the next thing I know, there's this whole series of books. It went from 1 book to now I'm up to my 12th book on the Beatles. So,
oh, wow.
And I've retired twice from doing Beatle books. I did all these books on the Beatles American records. The Beatles on Capitol, the Beatles on Apple, the Beatles on VJ, the Beatles Swan Song, which was a bit of a pun because it had the Beatles Swan Song, which was She Loves You. That was the only song they had, and I'll Get You. But the book also had, the Hard Day's Night soundtrack on United Artists, the recordings that were done in Germany, and the Capitol theme albums from the 70s and 80s. And I called the book The Beatles Swan Song and said this would be my swan song of Beatle books. I had covered all the Beatles American records, and I was done. And then a few years after that, Frank Daniels, a wonderful collector and a wonderful guy, all but put a gun to my head and said, you and I need to do a book on the Beatles records on Parlophone. And so we did. And that was my last book. And then somehow I ended up doing a book on the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper. And people really liked that. And they said, Bruce, you have to do a book on the White Album. And of course, that means you had to do a book on Abbey Road and you had to do a book on Let It Be. And so now I'm doing this thing which I call the Beatles album series. And each of the books has the same basic format. Rather than being 9 by 12 like my other books, they're 9 by 9, shaped like an album or an EP, only halfway between the size of an album and an EP. There you go, Pat. Thanks.
It's like a little box set kind of thing.
Yeah. And they have basically 3 main sections, although they're not called that. But the first section talks about when the record came out in the United States and when it came out in England and when it came out in Canada. And since I don't live in Canada, I got a buddy of mine, Pierce Hemmingson, who does live in Canada, to do that section. And although I don't live in the UK, I could not find a suitable author for the UK. People I talked to who were great Beatles writers from the UK, most of them were too young. And I wanted someone who lived it. And so what I did instead was I went through all of the British weeklies that came out. In the US, we had Rolling Stone eventually, and Cream much later than that. But in the UK, you had Melody Maker, you had New Musical Express, you had Record Mirror. So, you had like 4 weekly ones plus Record Retailer, which was an industry one. And so going through all those, at least I got the spirit of what was going on and how things were reported. And I did it from a historical standpoint. And then also I wanted to know, I thought readers should know what was going on in the world. So a buddy of mine, Al Sussman, who's an editor and a writer for Beatle Fan magazine, went ahead and did that. And Al wrote that. And then I got Frank Daniels to write something about the music and film of that time period. So that's the first section. The next section is what I call fan recollections. What I wanted to know was how you first experienced Sgt. Pepper. You could be a 3rd generation fan or a 1st generation. And I solicited these and I started getting these wonderful fan recollections from everyday people, some of them very touching. One person who wrote about how, his father, and he bonded over the song When I'm 64 and things like that. And then all of a sudden I get one from this guy who said he was in the Royal Guardsmen. Remember Snoopy and the Red Baron? And his story was that he was going to a recording session that summer to record a song called Snoopy's Christmas, because Christmas songs, let you in on a little secret, they're recorded in the summer. They're not recorded 3 weeks before Christmas. And he said he's driving to this recording session to do Snoopy's Christmas, and Sgt. Pepper comes on the radio and he has to pull off the side of the road and listen to it. And I thought, well, musicians are Beatle fans too. What if I could get some musicians? So I was able to get Pat DiNizio, unfortunately, who died a few years ago, of the Smithereens, big Beatles fan. And Pat wrote something from the heart, a wonderful bit. And I had a friend who knew Peter Tork of the Monkees. And so I asked her, do you think you could get Peter to do it? And it's a cute little story because what happens is a couple of weeks go by and I don't hear anything. So I shoot her an email and I say, hey, what did Peter say? And she emails back and she says, Bruce, I'm sorry. I forgot. Let me email him right now. And 20 minutes later, I get another email from her thinking, Pete said, thanks, but no thanks. But no, it was an email from Peter. And that meant it was spontaneous and from the heart, just like Peter was. Another person who sadly has since died. But a wonderful story from Peter. And the first time he heard Sgt. Pepper was he knew the album had come out, and he knew that the best stereo system in the Valley of anyone he knew was at David Crosby's house. So he called up Crosby, and Crosby said, look, I'm just getting ready to leave, but I'll leave the key under the mat. And he went over to David Crosby's and heard Sgt. Pepper there. And the best one of all, though, is I knew someone who knew Billy Joel. And so basically I was able to interview Billy Joel. And from the interview with Billy Joel, in his own words, put together his fan recollection. And Billy's was really incredible. And
yeah, I remember reading those. Those were really nice.
Yeah. And I've done the same for all the books. I mean, the last section of the book covers the recording sessions in detail, who played what and how the songs were written, how they were recorded, and all that other wonderful stuff.
Well, that one sounds like your baby, Bruce. I mean, it sounds like that's the one that you enjoyed the most writing.
Really enjoyed. I think still, out of all the books, probably my favorite book is The Beatles Are Coming. And the reason that's my favorite book is I got to interview 3 of my childhood heroes. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, Paul and George Martin and Ringo. No. My 3 childhood heroes, Walter Cronkite, of course, by then the most trusted man in America, the ultimate anchor man. I also got to interview Mike Wallace, who was the ultimate investigative reporter on 60 Minutes, and Edward Newman, who was a reporter with NBC, who was at the London Bureau for a long time. And it really meant a lot to me to interview these people, and all of them had wonderful things to say about the book. And Walter Cronkite even wrote the foreword to The Beatles Are Coming, which was perhaps my greatest coup of any Beatles writings I've ever done. So that would be my favorite.
Very impressive, very impressive. Yeah. And I remember when that book came out, and I loved the way you wrote it as if it were happening at that time.
Yeah. Right? And the story behind how I got the idea to do the book, it was where I'd gone out to Los Angeles for a Beatles convention. And while I was there, I wanted to meet with this woman, Betty Chiapetta, who was the controller for VJ Records. And Betty had told me she had come across stuff that she had put in storage. It had a couple of boxes of documents on VJ. And I'd, gotten a bunch of stuff from her to do the VJ book, but she called me up and she said, I found some more. I wonder if she had them all along. But anyway, she found some more and would be glad to give them to me if I could lend her some money, which translated that I could buy them from her, which was fine with me. And when I was going through them, the one that caught my attention the most was one from VJ to Contretemps Music, which was a music publishing, and it said, Please Please Me by the Beatles shall be released February 7. And we never knew what Please Please Me's release date was. And here it was, February 7, 1963. And when I was on the airplane looking at that telegram, heading back to New Orleans, I thought, how cool is that? That's 1 year to the day exactly when the Beatles land in America. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do a book. And I made some notes. And the book was going to be called The Beatles Are Coming. And it begins on February 7, 1964, with the Beatles landing at the newly named JFK International Airport.
Right.
And the Beatles go to the press conference. They go back to the Plaza Hotel, and they watch themselves on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Even had that in my notes. And at the end, Cronkite says, and that's the way it is, Friday, February 7, 1963. And then I wrote segue to February 7, 1964 is what Cronkite said. And then I segue to February 7, 1963 and talk about the first single coming out and how it was virtually ignored. And the book moves forward from February 3rd, 1963, all the way to February 7, 1964, and then covers that first U.S. visit. And I did that whole thing in about 10 minutes on the airplane, planned out the entire book. And
that just shows you how powerful radio was back then. I mean,
yes.
It was like we didn't know about that record. I mean, it was up to the whim of a music director or program director, and they chose not to play it.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine?
The Beatles had a couple of records out on VJ before I Want to Hold Your Hand was released on Capitol. And those particular records didn't sell that well, but they actually did make some of the local charts. And it was interesting because I was able to get some of these charts Chicago, which is where VJ was based, and was probably the first station to play a Beatles record in America. And it may have actually been on Valentine's Day, a Valentine's Day night, 1963, Dick Biondi of WLS in Chicago, probably the first to play it. And when I interviewed Dick, I asked him about the people at VJ, and he said, well, Ewart Abner was the president of VJ, and the promo guy was hawking the records. And he said, let me put it this way. Ewart had the best booze and the best girls. And that was all he had to say. So I kind of thought that was an interesting little story.
Well, that was an R&B label, you know, I mean, and it was
R&B gospel label, yeah.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. I don't know the exact release date, but then Tolly Records, and it's impressed in my head, the yellow label with Twist and Shout. And
Tolly was a subsidiary of VJ.
Yeah, okay. So when was that released? Because
that was actually the second one. Here's what happened. They knew they were not going to get any more Beatles songs. They had 16 masters. And so what they were going to do is they were just going to keep releasing singles. And so, you know, think about what was going on at the time in January. You had the Capitol single, I Want to Hold Your Hand. You had the Swan single, She Loves You. You had the VJ single, Please, Please Me. And you even had, you know, the MGM single, you know, of the same, you know, was what was it? My Bonnie was the A-side.
Bonnie, right? And
so that was 4 singles on 4 different labels. And VJ knows that disc jockeys are pretty stupid, so we can't have another VJ single so quickly. So they literally create the Tolly subsidiary to have the Tolly single, which was the next single. And so that was the way they did it. And it was Twist and Shout. And then for the next one that they put out, Do You Want to Know a Secret? They went back to VJ. And then for Love Me Do, they went back to Tolly. Now, Tolly had other records as well. It sort of became sort of the pop subsidiary of VJ, more or less. So the R&B music would be on VJ, and the pop would be on Tolly. There was no set rule that it was that way, but that's kind of what happened.
We used to hang out at this Frost Top drive-in when I was a teenager, and then this was 1964. And Twist and Shout on Tolly was in the jukebox.
Yeah.
And we knew when the guy, I think it was a Tack Amusement Company, would come and
should we play the theme from The Godfather as we speak?
That's right. And the rack jobber would show up.
Yes.
And he would empty out, you know, put in fresh copies and stuff like that. And he gave us kids the old records. So that's how I got my copy of Tolly, Twist and Shout. So and you know, it was like my prized possession at the time. So.
Yeah. And to me, probably the greatest rock and roll vocal of all time, John Lennon on Twist and Shout. You can hear his vocal cords shredding toward the end of the song. I interviewed Tony Barrow, who was a press agent of the Beatles, and Tony was in the studio toward the latter part of the recording session. John had a horrible cold, and he said that after the song was recorded, John went back to the canteen, slugged a glass of milk, and put the glass of milk down on the counter. And he said there was blood in the milk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he said, you know, that John couldn't have given it any more than that.
Yeah.
Gave it all for rock and roll.
Yeah. So what is your biggest selling book?
Biggest selling book would have been the Beatles Are Coming. And the VJ book, I did a press run of 5,000. It sold out. The Capitol books, both of them had press runs of 8,000. They sold out. The Apple book had a press run of 8,000. That sold out. So, and then we actually do have digital versions of the VJ and the 2 Capitol books, and they're revised and expanded editions. So even if you have the original hardcover books, there's plenty to gain from them. They're in PDF format, and you can do all sorts of cool things with them.
Yeah, and besides writing books and besides your law practice, you
have enough.
Well, it would be, but you're also a collector.
Yeah,
and you have quite an extensive collection. And in terms of that, which single that you own is the most collectible?
I think, you know, to me, VJ 498, which is Please, Please Me, Ask Me Why. When the single was reissued a year later, it had Please, Please Me and From Me to You on a single disc. But this one was the first Beatles record. You it sold about maybe 7,000 copies. And what I love about the original pressings, and they only did about probably 5,000 of the original pressings, the group's name Beatles was misspelled with 2 T's. And so to me, that's really cool. And I have a transition copy of it where on one side it has the old VJ oval logo and Beatles misspelled with 2 T's. And on the other side, it had the brackets label and Beatles spelled correctly. So that's kind of a cool piece. And that was one of the first items I bought as a collector. I was at something that at the time was called Beatle Fest. It's now called the Fest for Beatle fans. A lot of fun. And it was the very first record I bought there. It was VJ 498. And what was interesting was for that particular convention, I was staying in the Overflow Hotel. And my room number was, and I'm not making this up, 498. Something else interesting, on my driver's license, the numbers 498 are on it. And on my parents' checking account, which I didn't notice until after their death and I was doing the estate, and their checking account was 498.
Isn't that the name of your
numbers follow me around, Pat?
Isn't that the name of your company too, or
Yes,
something?
498 Productions. That's where the name comes from.
Well, that's a great story.
So
you collected other Beatles memorabilia, like you had the hand puppets, and what else?
yeah, I had some things, and the bobblehead things and things. And I also have a couple of gold records. I have an Abbey Road gold record, and I also have the actual I Want to Hold Your Hand gold record award that was presented to the Beatles by Alvin Livingston at the Plaza Hotel on February 10th, 1964. And the Beatles posed with it. The pictures were taken, and for some reason they just left it on the table, didn't bring it back to their rooms. And some guy who worked for Capitol took it, and eventually I was able to get it from someone else who worked at Capitol who got it from him. And that's now on loan to the Grammy Museum Beatles exhibit, which is a traveling roadshow.
Oh, very cool. So have you been to the Rogue Best Beatles Museum in Liverpool yet?
I have not. I've been to, the little place that they fixed up, at Mona Best's house, and that was quite nice to go down in that small little room where the Beatles played before they went to the Cavern. That was where one of the places they got their start at the Cosmo.
The Cosmo Lounge.
Yes.
Right?
The Cosmo. Yeah. And I've met Rogue and Pete a couple of times, both really nice people. Pete used to have a grudge on his shoulder. He no longer does. After Anthology came out, he got a very nice royalty check from Apple because he played on a couple of the tracks that were recorded in Germany. Right. And I think that and Pete told me, he said, Bruce, it wasn't the money, it was the recognition. And I said, come on, Pete, the money must have been nice. He said, yeah, it was nice. So used to take care of the grandkids' education.
I have a question for you. On that particular anthology record, there's a photograph of them with Pete Best, and Pete's torn out of the picture.
Yeah.
Was that done purposely?
I think Klaus Forman did it as a bit of a joke, yeah.
Yeah. I
don't think it was done in a mean-spirited way. It just was kind of, that's what happened. Pete got cut out of the group, and they brought in Ringo. I
tell you, we got a jigsaw puzzle of that particular album cover, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. a thousand pieces.
Wow.
It took weeks.
But you can turn them over to see the pictures, Pat.
What?
Just joking. I'm kidding. I used to have a math teacher that he would buy a jigsaw puzzle, and he would do them on the side with no picture on it and put them together to see if his mind could do it by the shapes of the pieces.
Oh, have you seen the White Album jigsaw puzzle?
That must be a lot of fun.
Yeah. It took so long to put that particular puzzle together, Bruce, that my wife and I, we numbered the rows and the
so you can do it again. Yeah.
Put it together and then brag and say, look how quickly we did this.
There you go. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So anyway, you got any last words?
Well, I hope these are my last words, but as an author, I always feel an obligation to say that you should go to my website, beatle.net, no S, just beatle.net. They have articles you can read, and they're kind of fun, but also because I'm an author, the Authors Union requires that I tell you should buy my books. And the nice thing is if you do buy my books from the website, that I sign all the books personally. And if you want them personalized, if you want it to say to Pat, best Beatles wishes, I'll do that. If you want me to say to Pat, thanks for Beatlerama, I'll do that too, I think I've done that before, by the way. And you didn't even have to ask, did you, Pat?
No, you didn't. In fact, let me see what you wrote this last time. Hold on.
Oh, don't say it on the air. It was obscene.
To Pat, BeatlesARama forever. Best Beatles wishes. Bruce Spizer. And the date.
There you go.
Stephanie Cara of New Orleans. I think she lives on the North Shore. She said to say hi.
Oh, good. Hello. How you doing?
Yeah, she's one of the people who I don't know. I guess she listens to BeatlesARama, but she also listens to Bob Walker's Yacht Radio. I don't know if you've tuned into that, but
I used to listen to Bob Walker in the old WTIX days.
Oh, me too. But don't tell him. You know.
Okay, I won't tell anyone.
Like he says, Pat, you know, you're only a few years younger than me. And I was saying, I was a late teenager listening to you. But anyway, well, Bruce, this has been fun, man. And I want to thank you for being my guest. And
glad to do
the fact that Brute Force is going to be a guest on Thursday at 2:00 Pacific, 5 Eastern.
That should be pretty cool.
My good friend Seth Swirsky is going to be a guest on Friday at 3:00 Pacific, 6:00 Eastern time. He collects baseball stuff besides being a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
You familiar with his band, The Red Button?
I'm not familiar with his band. I should get familiar with his band.
Well, you should go on YouTube and just type in Red Button, and they're very Beatlesque sounding songs. They're great. So anyway, well, thank you, Bruce.
Glad to do it.
All right, and I want to thank you once again, and we will see you later. And I want to thank everybody for watching. All right, so Bruce was great, just like I thought he was going to be. And we have one more thing to play for you. It's the Beatles from the beginning to the end. It's their solo careers. It's their humor. It's their incredible music. It's the British invasion. It's their American adversaries. It's an historical musical education. It's the Beatles and a whole lot more. A Beatles fan's paradise. It's BeatlesARama.com. Tune in. You'll love it.